Hello? How are you? Did you know that the first destroyer was the USS Bainbridge? Built by Nefi and Levy, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, commissioned November 24, 1902, decommissioned at Philadelphia July 3, 1919. One man died in service on board and remains in service.
Bambi was a U.S. Marine. The voice of the Disney character Bambi was Marine Donnie Dunigam. He was the youngest Marine instructor in U.S. Marine Corps history, went to Vietnam 3 times, and retired as a major.
Hi, did you know the very first class of destroyer was the Bainbridge class? This class was formed by 2 subclasses, the Bainbridge class built by Nefi and Levy, Philadelphia, and the Bainbridge class built by Trigg, Richmond, Virginia. How you doing? The USS Barry was the destroyer number 2. She was built by Nefi and Levy, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Commissioned November 24, 1902 and decommissioned June 28, 1919. Fates sold January 3, 1920 to Joseph G. Hittner, Philadelphia for $10,855 and broken up for scrap. USS Kidd, a Fletcher-class destroyer, was the first ship of the United States Navy to be named after Rear Admiral Isaac C. Kidd, who died on the bridge of his flagship USS Arizona during the 1941 Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Admiral Kidd was the first U.S. flag officer to die during World War II and the first American admiral ever to be killed in action. A National Historic Landmark, she is now a museum ship. Berthed on the Mississippi River in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and is the only surviving U.S. destroyer still in her World War II configuration. USS Bullard was a Fletcher-class destroyer of the United States Navy, named for Rear Admiral William H. G. Bullard. Bullard was launched February 28, 1943 by Federal Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Co., Kearny, New Jersey, sponsored by Mrs. H. G. Bullard, widow of Rear Admiral Bullard, and commissioned April 9, 1943. Sold for scrap December 3, 1973.
This 2,100-ton destroyer of the Fletcher class, equipped to provide anti-aircraft, surface and shore bombardment fire, deliver torpedo attacks, and furnish anti-submarine protection. Converted to a prototype anti-submarine warfare vessel, she has undergone extensive changes in equipment. Improved and enlarged ASW facilities have been installed with marked reduction in anti-aircraft and torpedo equipment. Her war complement of 309 crew members has been reduced to 264, with consequent reduction in living accommodations. But operating experience has demonstrated the need for additional personnel without additional living space being available, a common occurrence on present-day ships. The Softley's engineering plant controlled from this throttle board, requires 1/3 of the ship's total crew to operate the machinery that provides the power to carry the ship's offensive weapons to the scene of action and to operate them while there.
The first USS Downes was a Cassin-class destroyer in the United States Navy during World War I. She was later transferred to the United States Coast Guard, where she was designated CG-4. She was named for Captain John Downes. USS Mahan was the lead ship of the United States Navy's Mahan-class destroyers. The ship was named for Rear Admiral Alfred Thayer Mahan, a 19th-century naval historian and strategic theorist. Her design ushered in major advances over traditional destroyers. Among them were a third set of quadruple torpedo tubes, protective gun shelters, and emergency diesel generators, along with a steam propulsion system that was simpler and more efficient to operate. USS Compton, an Allen M. Sumner-class destroyer, was named for Lewis Compton, who served in active duty in the Navy during World War I and Assistant Secretary of the Navy from February 9, 1940 to February 13, 1941. Compton was launched on September 17, 1944 by Federal Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Co., Kearny, New Jersey, sponsored by Mrs. L. Compton, and commissioned on November 4, 1944. English sailors on the HMS Dolphin in 1766 discovered that native women on islands would trade sex for iron, and began pulling nails out, causing loss of the ship's structural integrity. The eruption of Krakatoa was so loud that it ruptured the eardrums of sailors over 40 miles away, killed over 36,000 due to the eruptions and subsequent tsunamis. A sailor who wishes to grow a beard in the Royal Navy has to submit a permission to stop shaving form. He is then allowed 2 weeks to grow a full set before he presents himself to the Master-at-Arms, who will decide if his beard looks stupid or is respectably full enough to be permitted.
Long before becoming a jazz great, John Coltrane joined the U.S. Naval Reserve on August 6, 1945. Not quite 21, Coltrane wanted to avoid being drafted into the Army. After boot camp, Coltrane was shipped out to Hawaii, where he performed as a guest with the Melody Masters. The group was a white-only band, so Coltrane could only perform with the group as a guest. Discharged just a year later in August 1946, Coltrane returned to Philadelphia and plunged into what would be a very successful music career.
Finnish people were believed to be able to control the weather. This resulted in a reluctance to accept Finnish sailors aboard ships from the Vikings all the way until the 1900s. Sailors considered black cats good luck and would use them as ship's cats, in hopes of a safe voyage. The Navy is now teaching sailors celestial navigation as a response to potential cyber attacks to ship navigation systems. The term, groggy, comes from either the British or American Navy. These sailors drank grog, which was a mix of rum, water, and citrus juice, which was used to fight scurvy. Someone who is dazed or sleepy might feel as if they have had too much grog, making them groggy. When a U.S. Navy ship returns from deployment, the first sailors allowed off the ship are sailors whose wives gave birth while they were away. Better give a home call before get there, if you what I mean. In 2002, while returning to the U.S., the USS John C. Stennis aircraft carrier stopped in Australia, where the sailors wore out the local sex workers to the point the brothel had to close down temporarily. Fearing rogue kamikaze attacks, U.S. Navy Admiral Halsey informed his sailors of the end of hostilities in the Pacific with this message: cessation of hostilities. War is over. If any Japanese airplanes appear, shoot them down in a friendly way. Teddy Sheen was an Australian sailor during World War II, who during the sinking of the HMAS Armidale, and after being shot by a Japanese fighter plane, strapped himself to an anti-aircraft gun and covered the evacuation of the ship's crew until he and the ship submerged. Sailors aboard submarines work 6-hour shifts so that it is easier for them to give their undivided attention to the equipment they operate during a shorter shift. The military also switched submarines from an 18-hour workday to a traditional 24-hour one, improving morale significantly. In the 1500s, British sailors would receive rations of rum as partial payment. To ensure the rum wasn't watered down, they would measure the proof by dousing gunpowder with it, and then test to see if the gunpowder would ignite. The gunpowder would only ignite if the rum was greater than 57% alcohol by volume. A monkey's fist knot is used as the weight in heaving a line between ship and dock. Recognizing their potential, drunken sailors began using them as melee weapons in street and bar fights, with the knot eventually being adopted by street gangs of the 19th century. Unsinkable Sam was a sailor during World War II who survived the sinking of the Bismarck, switched sides to the Allies, then survived the sinking of both the HMS Cossack and the HMS Ark Royal. Unsinkable Sam is also a cat. Poon Lim, a Chinese sailor, survived for 133 days alone in the South Atlantic, using methods such as capturing a shark and drinking the blood from its liver to survive.
In 1989, Barbie joined the Army. In 1990, she joined the Air Force. A year later, she joined the Navy, and then in 1992, she joined the Marines. Her uniforms, ranging from battle dress uniform to formal military dress, were approved by the Pentagon.
The worst shark attack in human history occurred in 1945 after the USS Indianapolis was sunk in the Pacific. As many as 150 sailors waiting to be rescued were killed by sharks. The goat is the Navy mascot partly because sailors used to leave goats on remote islands to propagate and become a source of food for passing ships, a practice which caused long-standing environmental issues due to the introduction of an invasive species. The first U.S. warship to be named after a black man was named in 1943 for sailor Leonard Roy Harmon. Harmon worked serving food to officers, one of the few jobs available to black sailors. At the Battle of Guadalcanal, however, Harmon deliberately exposed himself to enemy fire to save a shipmate. When two British sailors saw the ancient Roman column, Pompey's Pillar, in 1803, they climbed it, flew a Union Jack, affixed a weather vane to the top, ate steaks, and toasted King George III. In 1961, drunk submariners from USS Archerfish bought a goat and smuggled it onto their base in the trunk of a taxi. On the sub, the goat quickly made a mess and ate the chief's blanket. Ordered to remove their new friend the next day, the crew then found that getting the goat off the sub was more difficult than getting it on. Some mines are set to explode in response to changes in magnetic and acoustic fields. Sailors on minesweepers are not allowed to have wire coat hangers because they could kill their magnetic signature and set off a mine. USS Doris Miller CVN-81 will be the fourth Gerald R. Ford-class aircraft carrier of the United States Navy. Doris Miller is scheduled to be laid down January 2026. Launched October 2029 and commissioned in 2032. The ship, named for Messman's second-class Doris Miller, is the first aircraft carrier named for both an enlisted sailor and an African American. The ship will be the second to honor Miller, who received the Navy Cross for his actions during the attack on Pearl Harbor. The first ship was the frigate USS Miller Foxtrot 1091. More than 100 American and German sailors died in a naval confrontation in the Samoas in 1889, despite neither side firing a shot. The captains on both sides refused to show weakness by taking steps to prepare for an oncoming hurricane. In 1968, captured U.S. sailors showed their fingers in propaganda photos released by the North Korean government. That episode happened when North Korea captured the USS Pueblo on January 23, 1968. The ship became the longest-held captive U.S. Navy vessel in the history of the United States. Its crew was released, but the USS Pueblo is still under the captivity of North Korea. The word strike, as in a labor stoppage, borrows from the practice of 18th-century British sailors who would strike or lower their ship's sails and not raise them again until they'd been paid. William Adams, an English sailor, was the first Englishman to set foot in Japan and was one of few Westerners in history to have been a samurai. Not all torpedoes are designed to pierce hulls then explode. Some detonate below the target ship without making contact. This creates a gas bubble that causes the ship to be thrust out of the water then dropped back into the resulting void, often breaking the vessel in half and sinking it. Through World War II, sailors who did well were told, "Ter Victor George," which was code for, "Well done." After the war, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO was formed and it standardized communications. NATO created a system of B flags for administrative communication. The last B flag was BZ. The Allied Naval Signal Book created the phonetics for each letter and BZ became Bravo Zulu, which means well done too. The Navy has rich diction, but don't get it mixed up. That is, once you enter the Navy, sailors must learn a whole new language. Ships don't have walls, they have bulkheads. Ships also don't have windows, they have portholes. Your left side is your port side and your right side is starboard. The mess deck is where you eat, and the deck is where you walk. Above your head is an overhead, not a ceiling or roof. And if you need a toilet, you will find that in the head, but the rack is where you sleep. The destroyer USS Johnston DD-557, in the Battle of Samar in 1944, caused such damage to the Japanese naval forces that when she was mortally wounded and went to the depths of the sea, the enemy gave her a formal salute in recognition of her courageous way of fighting. The USS Tang, one of the most successful submarines of the Second World War, was accidentally sunk by one of its own torpedoes. At the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, Louisiana, there is an attraction that tells the story of the last hours of the brave crew of the USS Tang. USS Laffey DD-724 is an L&M Sumner-class destroyer which was constructed during World War II, laid down and launched in 1943, and commissioned in February 1944. The ship earned the nickname, "The Ship That Would Not Die," for her exploits during the D-Day invasion and the Battle of Okinawa when she successfully withstood a determined assault by conventional bombers and the most unrelenting kamikaze air attack in history. Today, Laffey is a U.S. National Historic Landmark and is preserved as a museum ship at Patriots Point, outside Charleston, South Carolina. Bill the Goat has been the U.S. Naval Academy mascot since the early 1900s. Legend has it that a Navy ship once had a goat for a pet, and on the way home to port, the goat died. This goat was so beloved that the sailors saved its skin and planned to have it mounted upon their return. 2 ensigns were entrusted with the goat's skin but, on their way to the taxidermist stuffed, but got distracted by a Naval Academy football game.
The USS Cavalier was a United States Coast Guard ship that was present at the invasion of Saipan. Actor Cesar Romero, who played the Joker in the 1966 Batman series, served on board.
Nazi submarines almost reached the United States in World War II. There are 22 German submarines from World War II sunk off the east coast of the United States. The east coast of the United States was called the battlefield of Operation Drumbeat, whose mission was to sink German submarines from 1942 onwards. The map shown here does not include the submarines sunk after the war. There is a famous photograph taken from a periscope that supposedly shows the lights of Manhattan on a night in 1942, which was supposedly taken by a Nazi submarine in 1942.
I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay, so I can sit out here and waste my life away, drag back home and drown my troubles away. It's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me, people like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is. Oh, it is living in the new world with an whole soul. These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just wanna have total control. Wanna know what you think, wanna know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do, 'cause your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end.
Sultana was a commercial sidewheel steamboat which exploded and sank on the Mississippi River on April 27, 1865, killing 1,167 people in what remains the worst maritime disaster in United States history. The disaster was overshadowed in the press by events surrounding the end of the Civil War. including the killing of President Abraham Lincoln's assassin John Wilkes Booth just the day before. No one was ever held accountable for the tragedy. The company that built the torpedoes used by the Japanese to attack Pearl Harbor was destroyed when the atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. We won the race of discovery against the Germans. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
The Confederate States of America created explosives disguised as pieces of coal. Saboteurs mixed the coal torpedoes with regular coal, and when workers shoveled them into the steam engines they detonated, damaging or destroying the ship. From 1941 to September 1943, American subs were plagued with faulty torpedoes that had a failure rate near 70%. Sub-captains started relying on their deck guns instead until the problems were corrected. The warships called destroyers today were originally torpedo boat destroyers, since their sole purpose was protecting powerful but vulnerable capital ships from torpedoes. The torpedoes that sank the cruiser General Belgrano on May 2, 1982, during the Falklands War, were of a model first used more than a decade before the Second World War. The ARA Belgrano was the former USS Phoenix, a Brooklyn-class cruiser sold to Argentina in 1956.
USS Hollandia was a U.S. Navy escort carrier. On board served actor Paul Newman as a radio operator. Newman is aboard her in 1945 in Japanese Redemption.
How appropriate! Do you know the name of the first American ship to enter Tokyo Bay in 1945, just after the Japanese surrender? The ship's name is the USS Revenge. The USS Revenge was a minesweeper, and its mission was to ensure that Tokyo Bay was free of mines and safe for the ships of the American occupying forces. In World War II, weather reports were censored to prevent enemy submarines from learning about conditions. A football game in Chicago was so covered in fog that the radio announcer couldn't see the field. But afterward he was officially thanked for never using the word fog or mentioning the weather. In 1942, American workers decided the best way to celebrate the Labor Day was to demonstrate the true industrial might of the United States. In that one day, 150 naval ships were launched or had their keels laid. The ships included destroyers, submarine chasers, and minesweepers. USS Greenville, a nuclear submarine, was carrying 16 civilians and showing of an emergency surfacing drill where the sub rockets to the surface as fast as possible. The thrilling maneuver was spoiled by the sub slamming into a Japanese fishery training ship, the Ihai Maru, carrying high school students. The Ihai Maru was sunk, and 9 Japanese died, including 4 students. This occurred only 10 miles off the coast of Oahu. On top of the collision blunder, the captain of the Greenville chose not to rescue survivors. The captain of the sub received only minor punishment. With the Cold War still going full speed ahead, Soviet Whiskey-class submarine S-363 ran aground on the coast of Sweden on 2 kilometers from the main Swedish naval base. Aside from the blunder of running aground, The Soviet Navy was further caught violating Swedish territory and suffered the indignity of the sub's captain being taken ashore by the Swedes for questioning and examination of the ship's log and instruments. The situation nearly developed into a shooting conflict until after 10 days Swedish tugboats pulled the sub free and the crisis was over. A such huge project. A $350 million drillship built in the early 70s by U.S. billionaire Howard Hughes to collect mineral riches from the ocean floor was actually a cover for the CIA to be used to lift a lost Soviet submarine loaded with nuclear missiles up from the floor of the Pacific Ocean, 3 miles deep. Did you know that the same team of Navy SEALs that killed Osama bin Laden was the team that killed the Somali pirates who kidnapped the captain of the Maersk Alabama? This story is told in the movie Captain Phillips. Jim Carrey went to a Navy SEAL to learn torture resistance techniques so that he could deal with the makeup process during the filming of The Grinch. To prevent Carrey from quitting the movie, or simply going mad, this actually happened. Carrey stated that the makeup took up to 8 hours and 30 minutes to apply. More than 100 makeup sessions were needed before the filming was completed. An Easter egg in the movie Master and Commander. Did you know that you can find a sailor taking a dump in a scene from the movie? At 53 seconds of minute 57, you can see it. It's a historical fact. On ships of that time, the toilets used to be in the bow of the ships so that seawater could wash them naturally. And since sailing ships can't travel directly against the wind, the toilets were always upwind, so any unpleasant odors wouldn't linger for long. Fred Gwynne, who played Herman Munster in the TV show The Munster Family, enlisted in the Navy during World War II. Serving as a radio man aboard a subchaser. After the war, he attended Harvard University. An aspiring painter, Gwynne drew cartoons for the school's notorious humor magazine, The Harvard Lampoon, and later became president of the publication. Winfield Scott, brevet lieutenant general in command of the entire Federal Army, presented Abraham Lincoln with a grand strategy for the war shortly before the Battle of Bull Run. The Anaconda Plan called for a stiff blockade of southern seaports in conjunction with an amphibious advance along the line of the Mississippi River. These operations would strangle the Confederate economy, based so heavily on the international cotton trade, and split the rebellious nation apart. Although the slow and relentless squeeze of the plan was disparaged by critics who thought the conflict would be over in a matter of months, Lincoln stuck by Scott's blueprint throughout the war. Hello? How are you? Did you know that the first destroyer was the USS Bainbridge? Built by Nefi and Levy, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, commissioned November 24, 1902, decommissioned at Philadelphia July 3, 1919. 1 man died in service on board and remains in service.
Bambi was a U.S. Marine. The voice of the Disney character Bambi was Marine Donnie Dunegam. He was the youngest Marine instructor in U.S. Marine Corps history, went to Vietnam 3 times, and retired as a major.
Hi, did you know the very first class of destroyer was the Bainbridge class? This class was formed by 2 subclasses, the Bainbridge class built by Nefi and Levy, Philadelphia, and the Bainbridge class built by Trigg, Richmond, Virginia. How you doing? The USS Barry was the destroyer number 2. She was built by Nefi and Levy, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Commissioned